Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 149. We're on the precipice. Always this happens when you get right to the edge of a big round number, because next week will be our 150th episode. I am NBZ, of course, and I'm joined by the person who's also been here for all 149 other episodes.
149. It was September 2017 when we last had our episode 100. So we did our top 50 games of all time then.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because also your name's Bally. Hi, Bally.
Oh,
I didn't get to say
Bally.
Bally.
Yes.
That there are
Bally Byleth.
Yes, there are certain podcasts that are like daily, and Kind of Funny Games Daily just surpassed 500 episodes, but also we've been going for longer than them, so it's just weird because like the number of episodes you do is just depending on your schedule. There are podcasts that are weekly, that if we were weekly we would be celebrating 300 episodes at this point, but alas, that's how it goes. Our numbers may be smaller, but we have been going for a pretty fucking long time at this point, so it's just interesting the way that works out. Regardless, we are going to be celebrating 150 next week with our classic thing that we started on our 50th episode, which is our top 50 games of all time, and reshuffling the list and figuring out where everything will go again. We're blowing it up, Bally. We're blowing it up, and we're going to start from scratch and see if we can't make a hell of a list one more time. See what happens with that. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So look forward to that next time. That's in a couple of weeks. But also want to let you guys know that we have a result of our Backlog Club winner, which we're going to talk about at the end of the show. That'll be our next Backlog Club. So stay tuned for then, and we will discuss that after we are done here. But look, Bally, it's currently the start of August. Fire Emblem Three Houses came out on the 26th of July, and in a week, just over a week, like 9 days maybe at this point, I've put 56 hours into Fire Emblem Three Houses, and I'm literally, this morning I was like, Bally, can we record later because I'm about to finish the game? I got to a point and I was like, actually, no, this is going to take longer than I thought.
There's no way that was the end of the game.
I'm literally one chapter away from the end of the game, basically. So I have a pretty comprehensive outlook on Fire Emblem Three Houses and all that stuff. But we'll talk about all that stuff. I forgot to say, Bally, you need to tell us what we're going to talk about in this show. So let's get that out of the way first.
So as episode 150 is going to be an extended episode, it's going to be a slightly shorter show this week with two segments. First segment, we've got a lot of Fire Emblem to talk about, other games we've been playing, and then second segment, we've got a couple of your listener emails.
Absolutely, yes. But we are going to kick things off by talking about Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is obviously a huge game, a big release for Nintendo. I think it is the best-selling Fire Emblem at launch so far in the history of the franchise. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. That seems to be happening for pretty much every big Nintendo property that has come out, right? The Switch just has...
On Switch, yeah.
It has this magnetic nature when it comes to its install base of people who are like, hey, I'll just buy everything, right? Like, people like buying things on Switch, and they want to be there day one, and they want to get in on these new games, and I do think that Fire Emblem Three Houses is attractive from a marketing perspective. Like, I think that they have framed it as a big boy console experience. Like, it's definitely much more impressive visually and all that stuff compared to its previous handheld outings. And we're now at a point where a console Fire Emblem can actually succeed because the series has been so popular since Awakening. It's like 7 years ago now, in 2012 or whatever. And yeah, it's interesting because I think there are a lot of people jumping on for the first time. So I think a lot of people even listening to this podcast might be first-time Fire Emblem people. And I think a lot of it is intimidating, right? A lot of it can be overwhelming. Yeah. And you, Bally, obviously are not as big of Fire Emblem fan as I am. And I want you to maybe speak to the beginning stages of the game,
sure.
Like how you felt about how it introduces mechanics and things like that, and your impressions kind of currently of how it's going for you.
So I think presentation-wise, the first 10 hours have been fantastic. I think the voiceovers, VO makes a huge difference. I already really enjoyed recent Fire Emblem writing in Birthright, Conquest, and Awakening. I already enjoyed sort of the support conversations and the character relationships and things like that. And I think that in terms of that, the voice acting just makes such a big step up. On top of, like, I think the art style is quite distinct. It took me like a little while to get used to, but I am now in favor of this art style. Like, I think it works well. So like from a presentation perspective, I think it's very welcoming to sort of a new Fire Emblem player. Mechanically, oh boy, like I'm someone who like knows Fire Emblem. I know how it works. I know good strategies. I know about like traditional class systems and this, that, and the other. And I think to take what used to be the weapon skill level and turn that into its whole range of stats now per character that you can level up independently of, you know, their regular levels that boost their other stats. I hope I've articulated that correctly.
Well, so let's explain it, because we have, when you're in the school area, right, when you're running around the monastery, when you're teaching the kids, essentially, when you teach them, there are different kind of stats that you put investment into. And these are what traditionally would be the weapon levels, right?
Yes.
But also they have things like riding or heavy armor or flying skill or authority, which is a brand new thing that governs a completely separate aspect of the battle system. And so these skills are now kind of the core things by which a lot of the game operates, because not only do you have to have like sword level B to be able to wield a silver sword, for example, which you always had to do in any Fire Emblem game, was like iron sword requires E level, then steel sword requires D level, etc., etc. They've now added in an extra layer because you have A plus, B plus, C plus, etc. So there's like a plus level because it's a long game and they want you to take your time to kind of build through these stats. But also all of the classes are now based around what levels in those particular stats that you have. So in order to be a archer, you have to have, say, a D level in bows, right? And you can't change your class. Well, you technically can. You'll just have a lower percentage chance to do so, because changing class in this game is like taking an exam, essentially. Like, they build up their skills, and the higher their skill is, the more likely they are to pass the exam. So if they have that exact skill that you need, they have a 100% chance. If they're close to it, if they're like a B plus and it needs an A, you might see it says like, 75% chance to pass. And I have, especially in the later game, where some of the master classes require a lot of weird combinations that you aren't really prepared for, I have had moments where I'm like 68% chance to pass, and I've just gone for it. I make a save beforehand, and like if I fail, I'll just reload, and I just do it. And then sometimes I pass, and I'm like, oh, well, I don't actually need to invest in it anymore because I now have the class I want. So it's a little weird in that sense, because you can kind of take it to the edge, but it's also about whether you want to guarantee it or not. And it's much safer, I think, in the early game to just guarantee it, or easier, as it were, because a lot of the like class skills make sense, as opposed to later on in the game where they make less sense.
I would say where original Fire Emblem games, each unit had a specific class that could then upgrade into a range of other specific classes based on that character. It's now a lot more malleable, and essentially the game is forcing you to create gates, I guess, and channels with which you have to fulfill those stats in order to upgrade to that class. So it just gives you far more options. It really opens up kind of what you can do with each character, on top of the fact that they're kind of like new classes in the way that, like, authority, as you said, it's like a completely new thing. And for someone like me, that definitely was overwhelming, like especially for the first 3 hours. And as you said, like, you have these classes, but then before you go into the classes, it's important that your characters have high motivation, because you need to raise their motivation in order to make those classes more productive. So you spend time in the monastery and doing lots of other things, boosting motivation. But you can also do loads of other stuff in the monastery. You can give people gifts. That also improves relationships and motivation. You can have support conversations. You can go for cups of tea. You can go for tea parties. You can go for lunch. You can fish. You can do gardening. You can create a wealth of things that you can use for gifts, as well as boosting motivation, as well as, I don't know, buying and selling stuff. And there's a lot. And where I feel like the series reached a real kind of streamlined experience, I'd almost say, with a game like Fates. I think the aspects were quite streamlined and it was quite well explained. They have definitely reopened that formula and kind of done something, in my view, very different.
It's entirely different, yeah.
And that is a lot to take in, but 10 hours in, I am actually now feeling like I know what class I want characters to be. I feel like I know where I want to go in the monastery to do this specific thing before I do my next mission. There's still huge aspects of the game I've not been doing much of, and kind of thought, I don't really know what the benefit of that is versus doing this other thing that I already know is much better. For example, I think like eating with two of your class rather than, fishing or something is worth it's a better use of your time, because it increases motivation, it increases the support level between those three characters. And I just think the game doesn't do an amazing job of saying this is much better than that. It very much lets you work that bit out, and that can maybe be not very handholdy at a time when you probably are just wanting a bit of a handhold at points, just to kind of work out where you want to go next.
Definitely. And I think the good thing about the start of the game is it does limit you, right? Like, it opens up portions of the monastery slowly so that you can get used to them. And I think one of the things that people complain about a lot is just text boxes for tutorialization, and I tend to not be a huge fan of that. I know that you're kind of fine. Like,
I love them. I'd be lost in this game without those, honestly.
Right, exactly. And you can just pull that up at any time. Like, the guide is in the menu, and you can just go back, and there's lots of little things that they will explain to you. But I think some of the stuff that you need to clear up about the monastery is there are certain things that take up points, and there are certain things that do not, right? Yeah. So, like, there are certain activities which are specific to your professor level, right? And your professor level goes up as you interact with your students, as you teach them, as you do loads of different things to up your professor level. The higher your professor level, the more activities you can do per exploration of the monastery.
So it's very important.
Exactly, right? And at this point in the game, I have like 10 activity points. Like, I can basically, like, I have too many activity points.
So per class, you can teach 10 like individual.
Well, no, that's slightly different, right? Because so there's lots of activity points, right? When you go into battle on during the month, right? Because this game is split into months, and each month you will have 4 weekends, usually, maybe 3 sometimes, in order to spend your free time and do what you want. So you can either explore the monastery, which means going and doing all the stuff that you just talked about. You can go for a battle, which means sometimes you can do paralogs, which are side quests. Sometimes you can find rare monsters and things like that. And you can also do seminars where you're able to get other teachers in to improve the weapon skills or whatever of your students. So for battles, you usually have far fewer activity points for battles. Like, I think at the moment I have 3. When it comes to teaching your students, you have a different set of activity points. And then when it comes to just doing stuff in the monastery, you have a different set of activity points. So there's just a lot of these different sets that you have that you kind of are separate from one another, but you do build them up as your professor level gets higher. So that is kind of all tied together, but they are also separate. So, like, at this point in time, I can teach all of my students every time I want to go into one of those sessions, because I have enough points to do so. But where you're at, you might have like 3 students you can teach at a time, right? So that stuff does expand, and you get a lot more time to do it, and it kind of streamlines a little bit later on. But in terms of some of the activities that you do while you're in the monastery, I think I got into a routine, right, of like, okay, first thing I do is I'm going to the greenhouse to do my gardening. Then I'm going to go do a bit of fishing. Then I'm going to go...
What's the benefit of gardening mainly? Just to create flowers as gifts for people?
Yes, so you can get flowers as gifts. You can get food items, which are then used for either cooking or for when you have meals with people, because meals cost whatever food resources you have. So you need to have, tomatoes or cabbages or whatever to make, or fish, for example, to make, dishes in the actual sitting down and having a meal section of the game in the dining hall. So a lot of that stuff comes from doing the gardening, doing the fishing. So those are very light activities that will increase your professor level, but don't actually take away an activity point, because they're very like minor things. Whereas going for tea time with someone, which is like a one-on-one conversation where you kind of have a skill challenge, a conversation skill challenge, where you have to choose the right response that you think that person would like. And it's weird. I feel like it's a very weird framing. Have you done a tea time yet? Have you kind of...
No, where do I go to do that?
I don't know if you've unlocked it. You might not have unlocked it yet, but usually what happens is you just go up to a character and it'll be an option on them when you talk to them that says tea time. And every time you go for a tea time, it pops up like 3 options that you have to choose from, and one of them would be like capable comrades, one of them is like monastery memories, and one of them's like something else. And you have to, they're more like conversation topics almost, so you're trying to pick a conversation topic that you think that person would be interested in. And it's fascinating because it is, to some degree, a bit random, and sometimes you're like, well, that doesn't make it, like, why would I choose that? It doesn't make any sense. But I did find myself, as I was going through the game, and I think this speaks to the level of writing this game has elevated to, and the voice acting and everything to do with the characterization, is that when I started out, I didn't really know the characters very well. I didn't know their backstories, I didn't know much about where they come from, etc. And so I'd go into tea times and I would get all the questions wrong. I would just fucking fail it straight out, and I wouldn't get much out of the conversation. It would be like, you get to this point in the end, it's like, well, this was an awkward conversation. Like, it kind of says something along those lines. I'm like, oh shit, I'm like wasted all this time doing this. And as I've got further through the game and you get to know these people more, when you go into a tea time, now I'm like, okay, that's the option, and that's the option, and I'm just getting them right now, and I'm getting them correct because I have known these characters, and I've built up that knowledge, not through my skill in the game, like I'm not getting experience points, well I am in support and stuff, but that's using my own knowledge of the characters, because I have watched all these support conversations and listened to all their dialogue and all that stuff, which is pretty satisfying, I have to say. It's interesting that they've kind of gamified conversation to some degree, though at points it does feel a little random, and it does feel a little like, I don't know what option of these I should pick. It doesn't, not everything fits in very neatly, particularly with each character. But in that sense, the monastery stuff definitely becomes more routine, I would say. At the first kind of few times you go around, it's more about learning the space and learning where things are. I did mention this on Twitter, but when I first started playing, maybe it was the TV I was on or whatever, but I did start to feel a bit motion sick because I do think the frame rate in this game is not fantastic. There are clear and noticeable moments where it fluctuates and wobbles and stutters. And the monastery is a big example of that because it's a big wide open area. Intelligent Systems has never done anything like this before. And to be honest, Intelligent Systems didn't actually really develop this game. I think in total there were 17 developers from Intelligent Systems who worked on this, because this game was basically developed by Koei Tecmo. Like, that is ridiculous, and that's what happened. And you can definitely sense some of that jank to some degree. I don't know
that shininess that you associate with Koei Tecmo. I don't know.
Yeah, Warriors games and stuff like that, they have jank. They're not particularly the most polished games in the world. And this game is polished to some degrees. I do think the support conversation cutscenes, the character models are fantastic. A lot of that stuff is really sharp on a good HD screen. But some of the stuff when it comes to wandering around and just, obstacles and things like that, it feels a little less polished than you would maybe expect of a first-party Nintendo product. But that said, I do think it's interesting that they have branched out into this more Persona style of exploration. And what I'll say is, it doesn't quite hit the notes that Persona does. And I think that the perfect thing about Persona is that it limits you. And I think the monastery is not limiting enough, especially in the late game, in the sense that with Persona, you will have times of the day where it's like, okay, you've finished school, you can do all these things, but you can only do one of them. And you've got to pick which one you want to do. And so in your head, you're constantly like, okay, tomorrow I'll do that, and then the next day I'll do that. You're constantly thinking, I'll do that the next day. Whereas in the monastery...
Like Stardew Valley or something.
Right, exactly. It's exactly like Stardew Valley. It's constantly having that mental checklist in your head. Whereas with this game, you have the whole month to play with, and within the month, you can do a lot of shit. So, to be honest with you, you can kind of get everything you want done within one exploration thing. You can do all the side quests, all the mini kind of fetch questy things. You can do all your support conversations you want to do.
Are they worth doing, those side questy, fetch questy things? Because some of those use up a point and some don't.
I don't remember any of them using up a point for me personally.
I just did one with Geralt that did use up a point.
Well, I think that was more of a main... Was it a red one? Because I think that's more of a main quest one, probably.
Must have been.
Yeah, because the other ones don't tend to use up points unless they're specifically telling you to do something. Like one of the early game side quests is just introducing you to the training area, which is where you do like the Colosseum gladiator battles, which I showed you when you were over in Edinburgh. And that activity will use up a point, but it's the side quest is just telling you to do that activity, if you know what I mean, right? Whereas a lot of the side quests will be like, I dropped a thing, find it, and you'll see a little glowing thing on your map, and you have to go there and pick it up or whatever. So I would say do them because they're very light, like they don't require a lot of effort, and you'll get shit for doing them, which is usually worthwhile. So you might as well. I've done every single one. Like they're very easy to just kind of breeze through, and it is just the thing that you have constantly going. But what it does mean is that instead of spending like 2 minutes making a decision in Persona to like go have a drink at the bar with the journalist or whatever and build up your confidant there, in this case it's like you're going to spend an hour and a half in the monastery, and you're going to just get everything you want to get done. And you're going to just have a lot of... For me, I had a lot of choice paralysis, right? Because there are so many things. There are so many systems in this game. I haven't even mentioned things like battalions or, forging and repairing and all this other stuff that you can do within that space, that you get this paralysis of like, oh, what do I do? Like, I've got 19 things to do. Which do I do? And how do I prioritize? So I found myself a lot of the time constantly pinging between menus, whether it is in the dining hall having food between two characters and being like, okay, but I want to have food between these two characters. I want to make sure that it maxes out their motivation, but I also want to make sure that the two characters that I pick are characters that I want to build their support with so that I can then get their support conversation later. So a lot of my time was just in menus thinking in my head like, okay, I need to make the most optimal situation possible. And I think to some degree, because I optimize so much in the early game, I'm in the late game now and I'm just kind of breezing through a lot of the stuff because I'm like, I've achieved all my aims. I literally, every single one of my classmates has had up to an A support conversation with every single other classmate. There is not a single person from Black Eagles who has not had a maxed out support conversation with every other person in the class. Which is crazy, because I never do that with support conversations in other games, because a lot of the time there are so many characters that it's just not really feasible. Like, you can do it in games like Awakening, but what it requires of you is just so much grinding, because in a game like that, the only way to build support is to stand next to each other in battle. But the idea of the monastery is that it gives you so many other ways to build that support, that not only do you want to go after them, but it just kind of naturally happens. It just happens so much more immediately, and also in battles, it's so much more lenient with it, right? You don't have to be standing next to someone. You have to be within, I think, 3 spaces of them. So there are often moments where my entire army is clustered together, and so tons of people are just popping off supports left and right. And I think the most important thing about this is, you mentioned it, but the voice acting is so strong in this game. It is a level that Nintendo just hasn't done before, and there are very few exceptions to this rule. Like, I think Kid Icarus Uprising is great. Xenoblade Chronicles, just Xenoblade as a series, I think Xenoblade 2 is a little weak on that front, but the original Xenoblade I think is fantastic. Even Fire Emblem Echoes. Fire Emblem Echoes is really, you look at that as a blueprint for a lot of what this game does, down to things like Mila's turn wheel, which was allowing you to like turn back turns, gives you Divine Pulse in this game, which is another aspect that has meant I haven't restarted any fight at all throughout this entire game, because Divine Pulse is so useful as just like I fucked up that thing. Even something stupid like I open a chest with Petra and I accidentally, instead of sending it to the storage, I discard it, and like I threw away a really powerful weapon. I was like, oh fuck, I don't want to throw away that weapon, but all I had to do was just Divine Pulse back and undo that mistake, which is, I can't tell you how important that level of just giving you freedom to have the wiggle room is in a game like this. Because for someone like me, I play on Classic, I don't want to lose anybody, but it does mean in a game like Fire Emblem Fates Conquest, I was at a map for like 4 or 5, 6 hours because every time...
Just kept restarting. Yeah.
I had to restart and I had to go from the beginning, right? And this game just gives you that leeway to to kind of move away from it. But yeah, I do think one of the strongest aspects in this game is the writing and the story. It is on another level from where Fire Emblem has been before. And that's not to say, like, it's touching stuff like Uncharted or The Last of Us or like the kind of really good writing that we see in video games these days, because it's very far away from that. It still leans to some degree towards anime tropes, but it's less so than it has been in the past. But it is more of a, you know, very big characters, very bombastic things they're saying, sometimes very ridiculous things, but they are emoting and they are kind of getting across the depth of their characters in a way that is more nuanced and more interesting than anything Fire Emblem has attempted in the past, in my mind. And so that's why I think it is so worthwhile to do those support conversations. And it's actually why I'm not too worried about replaying this game to do Golden Deers and to do Blue Lions, because one of my favorite things about this game is just getting to know those characters.
Less so the overall plot.
Well, I think the overall plot is really good. I think it's one of the things that I think...
Considering your history with Fire Emblem plots is almost, you know, you don't care at all about like the overall plot.
Right, and I mean, it is generic to some degree, but, you know, there are twists that you don't see coming. There are things that happen where you're like, oh, shit, like, this changes everything. And there is also a really good sense in the second half of the game when the war is happening of all the moving pieces and where you are relative to them. Whereas in a game, I just finished Radiant Dawn recently, I streamed that game, and I have no fucking clue where anybody is or what relates to who and which country is where and all that shit. Whereas this game, in the cutscenes, does a good job of, like, it almost puts, like, a chess piece on a map and shows you, like, a direct line of, like, where the army is going and then to this point, and, like, really visualizes it for someone like me who struggles with knowing stuff like that, which I think is very, very smart and has worked very well. So yeah, I do have to emphasize that one of the strongest suits in this game, which in the past has been so rightly criticized, like Fates especially, has a garbage story with characters who are very, very shallow. This starts that way to some degree. You take a character, for example, like Dorothea, she's a songstress, she used to be in the opera, and her initial conversations you have with people are all about, like, oh, she needs to marry a rich man so that she can, you know, not have to worry about her life anymore, and that's her entire goal, is like go on dates with all these guys and try and find someone who is going to be right for her. And you're like, oh god, that's terrible. Like, this seems like a really badly written character. But over time, layers evolve, you peel things back, and you find out about her backstory, about, like, her dealings with nobles, because she's a commoner, and some class stuff. There's a lot of class stuff in this game, right? Because there's a very distinct difference between nobles and commoners. And that stuff is very revealing, and you, by doing all these conversations with all these different characters, you piece together the backstory, and there will be overlap sometimes. You'll be like, oh, right, I heard that thing in that conversation, but now she's bringing it up here. It's really good. I think it is 100% worth doing all those support conversations, because you will get such a better sense of these characters and who they are and where they're coming from.
I've been really enjoying the support conversations so far. And like you said before, the voice acting, it's just... Yeah, it's good.
It's crazy how much of it there is, because it's not just in those conversations, it's in all the major story moments. It's literally every part of this game, down to wandering around the monastery.
You can see why it was delayed quite a while, this game. Like,
yeah,
just recording all of that.
Down to wandering around the monastery and being able to talk to everyone, and literally everyone will have a voice line. Nintendo games do not do that. Ever. Like, that is something they just have never done, which is mind-blowing to me that they have put this much time into the VO talent of this game. It's crazy. And it does, I think, elevate it, right? It makes it feel like a AAA game where potentially people who played 3DS games wouldn't have thought of it in that vein. I personally do, because Awakening and Fates have very high production values. They're fantastic, really high quality games, but a lot of people don't have that perspective on it because they deem handheld games as inferior or whatever. But I think Three Houses just makes a case for, like, how big Fire Emblem is now and how important it is to kind of throw money at this thing.
I think I'm too early on to kind of compare it. Where is this in my mind compared to Awakening and Fates? But as a 10-hour experience, as someone slightly less into Fire Emblem, I would actually say that a game like Awakening is probably easier, simpler, explains systems slightly better than a game like Three Houses. And
it's less complicated, right?
Yes.
It does have things like the pair-up system, which isn't in this game, but this game has battalions. Have you got to battalions yet?
I have been using battalions. I'm a little confused. I understand they're represented by the 3 triangles, but sometimes I have a unit that has 2 triangles. What does that mean?
So that means that you've been hit a bunch. So when you take damage, your battalion will reduce. So even if you don't use your battalion, they will reduce. So yeah, it is a little tricky to figure that out. But that I was wondering, because I'm like, I haven't been using any battalions. Like, why do I have to keep replenishing them? And it's because, when you get hit, you take damage. As such, naturally the warriors who are with you will also take damage because they're getting hit by the attack.
Yeah, I think they're cool. I think as a traditional Fire Emblem player, it's very difficult to remember to use them, definitely, and kind of mix it into my array of what I normally do.
Right, because you have multiple different things popping up. It's like attack, assist, gambit. There's just lots of things that...
Yeah, what is gambit again? That's when they're surrounded, right? And you get extra damage.
No, gambit is using the battalion. Gambit is literally how you use your battalion.
But sometimes it says gambit and sometimes it just says battalion, doesn't it? Or is it always,
no, it doesn't.
Always gambit?
It's always gambit,
okay.
Yeah. Gambit is just using your battalion. That's your battalion attack, essentially.
And what's it called when you surround an enemy? Because that's another new mechanic.
Right. So that I don't know what that's called, but I do know that what happens is if someone is adjacent to an enemy, then you get a bonus, I think. So it's not if they're adjacent to you. It's like D&D. It's like if they're flanking the enemy, then you get a bonus or whatever.
Yeah. I use the Wargroove example. It's like the dogs versus the lance users in Wargroove.
Right, exactly.
Adjacent versus adjacent to the enemy.
Exactly, yeah, where the lances, you have to stand them next to each other versus the dogs. The dog has to be next to the enemy when you attack with the other dog or whatever.
So I would be interested to kind of look online and see what other people who are new to Fire Emblem think of this game, because I definitely personally think it's quite a lot to take in. It can get a little bit spreadsheety at points, especially when you're
100% a spreadsheet game.
And I think the Monastery is a very good cover up for what is essentially a series of complex spreadsheets, but
I mean, you can boil all video games down to that if you really want to be reductive.
I would argue less so action games, but yeah, no, absolutely. It does a good job of covering up a lot of that stuff, but then at the same time, I don't think there's been so much when you press X and you look at the multiple stats of any one character. I don't think I've ever seen so many stats on a single screen compared to any other Fire Emblem.
Yeah, and it doesn't help itself, right? Because it adds in all these new things, but then it has a lot of legacy things, right? From the skills, which all the skills, a lot of them are from previous games. Things like Aegis, Pervice, Lethality, all these skills that are very class-specific skills. So, the thief always has steal and lock touch, which means you can open doors and open chests and also steal things from enemies. Which also, I think steal is very redundant in this game, because not once have I come across an enemy that I could steal something from, because every enemy that drops something just drops it and I just get it when I kill them. So steal, I think that's just a legacy thing in there, because it seems pretty fucking pointless to me. But yeah, so you have all those abilities, which are the 5 slots that you have, but now you have new ones based on the skills that you're being taught. So when you get better with bows, your bow, whatever it's called, I can't remember what it's called.
Avo.
No, that's a void. Avo is a void. I mean,
hit.
No. I'm talking about the skills that are
skills, not
authority level 5 or bow level 2, right? And though you're right, those will grant those types of bonuses,
which is weird in and of itself. Yeah,
sure, but those are the ones that you want to have, because if you're really good with swords, you want to have sword level 5, right? Because it gives you a bunch of bonuses when you're using a sword, because you're going to be using a sword. So you have
it's just a very weird way to level up your sword in that way.
Exactly,
it's very different.
And then they don't have the weapons triangle, but then they supplement it with class-specific skills like Lance Breaker or Axe Breaker, which have always been in recent games in the series from Awakening onwards, and now they are there to kind of supplement that. So yes, you can attack a lance person with a sword, but if they have or Sword Breaker, they will still have a distinct advantage. Right. So, especially in the late game, that will likely be the case, that enemies will have those skills, etc.
Right.
So they are obfuscating it somewhat, but it kind of still exists. And to be honest with you, I never really relied on the weapon triangle that much. A lot of my Fire Emblem play was more about...
in this game or traditionally?
Traditionally, like I never really
same.
Like there are moments when you do think about it, but a lot of the time it's like, hey, I'm like 6 levels higher than this dude. It doesn't fucking matter what I use. Like the RPG elements will kind of overturn a lot of the strategic elements in some senses.
I think I focused on weapons triangle a lot more in the GBA games. Like when I played 7, I felt like it felt more important then. But Awakening and the 2 Fates games, it's definitely a step down in terms of like that.
Sure, because you have skills and things that change, your approach, which means that it's because like the GBA games, I always talk about them as like the purest version of Fire Emblem. Like they are just the core essence of Fire Emblem distilled down, and I think it is why I still look at those games as my favorites in the series, is because there's no bullshit. Like there's no skills, there's no all this, there's very simple class definitions. Like you go from archer to sniper, it makes sense, it's done, right? There's less customization, but in a sense I like that because it means you know where you're going and you know what you have to do. Whereas in the later games it does get a little bit up in the air with things like that. So
on the sort of information on the screen, 2 points. First point, I still think the 3DS games just have such a jump up on that, just because they can store so much of those numbers and crucial information onto the bottom screen, and it just makes everything feel cleaner, look cleaner, easier to use, because you can like use the stylus to touch any of those stats, and it's really quick to see what that stat means. I found myself pressing across like menus just to get to find out what that one skill did, that I would traditionally have just touched the stylus on the bottom screen to find out what that skill did. And then secondly, can we please have an industry standard for size of font in video games? Because Fire Emblem 3 Houses is just taking the piss with this, because it is tiny.
I disagree, honestly. Maybe I'm just, scarred from Xenoblade Chronicles X, but nothing will be as bad as Xenoblade Chronicles X in my mind. That was ridiculous. This, I think is fine.
I'll give you that, but Xenoblade Chronicles X is above and beyond anything in video games in terms of size of font. And like this is like, I know God of War was a big one in recent times for people, but this is way, way, way smaller than God of War.
But I think for me it's less important because the voice acting exists, and so I am still looking at the text, but it's less
but
laser focused.
We need an industry standard. It's just
we do. No, I totally agree with that. I think that 100%. Like you need to be able to
even the option to increase the size, which you can
resizing at the very least should be like customization options, especially on console, are so bad. Like it's just they really have no way of remapping buttons and things like that. Just there's so many things that Nintendo especially need to do to appeal to a wider audience, to make things more accessible essentially, and they don't, because Nintendo are very obsessed with the way people play and all of that nonsense. But I get where you're coming from. It just hasn't really bothered me. Maybe it's because I'm playing on screens that are pretty close to me. I played less so on TV.
Even on handheld, it is very small. Like it's and when that Switch Lite comes out later this year, like that's gonna feel
it'll be smaller.
Even smaller. So
that's true. Yeah. I get that for sure. It's a little cumbersome. And I think when we're talking about presentation, I do think the Monastery stuff is really good, but I don't think the battle screen itself is particularly easy to read, and I think because there's a lot of clutter. One of the problems I have is every character by default will have their little portrait and little is it their weapons next to them or something. There's all these portraits, there's a lot of information on all the enemies and all of your characters, and I only figured out, not recently, but maybe, I don't know, 20 hours into the game, that you can just press the X button and that will disappear, and then you can just see the characters, which makes it a lot easier to select which character you want to select, because I think those character portraits were really obfuscating people who are in front or behind each other. I didn't know who I was selecting, which was confusing.
Yeah, and you can like rotate the camera so it's looking much more aerial, but then that sucks a lot of the life out of
it does.
setting, I feel.
But I found a good middle ground where I could rotate the camera and see, because there's one map that happens maybe chapter 4 or something, where you have these very big walls and you can't see the enemies behind them on the default camera setting. So unless you tip the camera up, you don't know there's a fucking enemy behind that wall. Like it's a little bit stupid. So I think this is the problem, right? Because I naturally love what they did on the handheld series with making the battle screen characters all sprite based, like having those sprites integrated there.
It's so clean and crisp. It's got a specific style,
and the visual identity of the classes is so clear in the sprite design. The sprite design makes it so obvious what class that character is.
You're like, just as a really quick thing, your bulkier sprites were often the upgraded ones, because they had more little pixels animating like a little cape or lapel or something silly, or a wyvern or something. And then your basic units were the skinnier, less developed ones, I guess you could say. And then that differential is almost non-existent in this game in a way that just feels very jarring. And on top of the fact, I think the 3DS games were really good at making really bold, red, clear, like squares for like the units selected and like where they could move, and all of that just feels a little more faded than it did on the 3DS, and it just
it's a little more so.
It's not quite as clear, and I do like that clarity, especially when we are talking grid-based, turn-based strategy, where it's so important.
Sure, and you did play Conquest really recently, so like I think it's a lot clearer in your mind. And I'm thinking back to it now, and like when you press the button to show all the enemy movement, it is a deep red. It is very clear, and not to say that it's not clear here, because I think it is. If you press the shoulder button, I think it said R, it shows the purple range, which is all enemies.
Yeah, you got that purple, and then you can individually select the red, which is useful. Yeah.
Which is I love that feature. I love being able to see everyone and then the specific one.
I leave purple on, and then I do not the immediate wave, but the wave behind. So I'm trying to deal with one wave of enemies each turn, and I know that I have to. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's really good to figure out. And another amazing thing this game does, which some people might cry out blasphemy, but it shows you these red lines that tell you not only who the enemy is going to attack, but their percentage hit chance and how much damage they will do to that character, which is really important. So as if the Divine Pulse wasn't enough to give you kind of backups, this really lets you stop and think and be like, actually, I can't. I think I could maybe put that person there, but I can't. They're going to die, so I'm not going to do that. And I think for newer players especially, that's such a helpful thing. Like, and for me, I don't pay attention to it that much, because as someone who's played a lot of Fire Emblem, I kind of know who I can put where. Like, if there's a big magic person coming, I can put a mage there because they have high resistance, whatever. Like, I know how to figure my way around, but it's really helpful for people who are new to the series, for sure. So some of the visual stuff is a step forward, some of it's a step back. I think it's especially bad at the start of the game when everyone is in their school uniform and they don't have different outfits to differentiate them. At this point, like, characters like Mercedes and Dorothea, they're both magic units, but I can tell the difference because their outfits are just so vastly different from one another. Whereas in the early game, it's like Linhardt and Hubert. They're both around the same size. They both have similar haircuts. Both have dark hair. Like, they both look the fucking same on the map. So just figuring out who is a case of going over them and just figuring out their character portrait. So that's an early game criticism that I think is just a factor of, you start out and they're all the same class because they're all just like noble or commoner and they're in their school uniform, really. So it's a bit of a confusion, but it's overcome. It does make sense. Have you found the map so far and kind of the objectives and the battles themselves? Like, how's that been, and difficulty-wise? And
I mean, that's a big takeaway from this game, is that with Conquest or Awakening, Birthright, and that, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time I'm playing Fire Emblem, I'm spending on a map battling. And you really feel with this game that has dropped right down to maybe 50-60%, because
It's probably 50%.
right, exactly, because you really are spending a lot of time in the monastery, and in spreadsheets is a harsh word, but like in menus where you're leveling up skills and, you know, boosting your armor and your flying and all these things. And
yeah,
so
and I mean, we can talk about the UI. We've always talked about it a little bit, but the whole, like, all the class stuff, the way that is doled out and where you have to go to change classes and see what skills you need for class, it's just... Like, why do I have to go into certifications to see all the classes? Why is reclass not in the certifications menu and I have to go into my inventory? Why the fuck is reclass in inventory? That makes no sense. What? Like, the inventory menu opens up to 5 other fucking menus. It's ridiculous. It's so illogical.
And I've been constantly asking you, like, what do I need to do this? I can't even find the thing on in Google to find this. And you're like, oh, you want this sheet? Bally. I'm like, no, I'm missing that one thing. Oh no, this one's like, all right, yeah, okay. And how do I link that to the game? Okay, right, okay. And yeah, it's a lot, and I think...
It's a lot. It's also a thing that, like, after playing 55 hours, I don't even think twice about it, but that's just because I've played so much that it's just burned into my brain now.
And some of them are more straightforward, like, what do you do to become a sniper? You really need to be good at archery. Like, that is fine. Like, that's a consistent thing with the series, but there are some random uses of the lance that are needed in a number of them. And...
The one that drove me fucking crazy was, in order to become a paladin, you need to have really high lance and really high riding. Yeah,
which makes sense.
In order to get paladin to the logical next class, which is the Great Knight, which is the master class, you need to then have axe and heavy armor, 2 things which I hadn't invested in at all for my paladin, nowhere close to doing. God, and so in order to get him from stage 3 to stage 4, I had to go out of my way to be like, okay, Ferdinand, right, we're going to change your focus to be heavy armor. We're going to put you on the goal where you're doing the weeding, so you're doing the heavy armor skill. I'm going to, you know, try and just
Why is
boost that
weeding
as much
heavy
as possible.
armor? That's just hilarious.
That will make more sense in the second half of the
fine.
game, why they've tied that together. It also, yes, it doesn't make sense there, but you'll see.
Okay, you just sound crazy at the moment, but
you'll see. In any case, it's fucking stupid. It's the master classes drive me fucking insane, because half of them you need riding for. And characters like Linhardt, who this whole time has been Bishop, Light Magic, Reason, I'm not thinking about riding. I have no fucking clue about riding. Also, he needs to have Lance. He needs Lance level C. I don't want to have him use a Lance. He's a fucking healer and uses magic. And unless you look ahead, unless you plan for this stuff, which thankfully I did, like it maybe... I was about 15 hours in the game before I started planning for it. But once you do, then you're okay. It's just, it doesn't make sense for someone who is new to this series and who is going down a certain path. And sometimes the characters will come to you in class and they'll be like, I think I should focus on this. And I think a lot of people will be like, well, I don't know. You probably know better than me.
That's normally good for the immediate next class, but it's not good for, like... down the
long
line.
term.
Yeah.
Right. And I was planning for the long term, and that's the advice I gave to you was like, hey, decide now. Make sure you know what you're going for, because...
Oh, my magic users, they're always doing that riding practice now.
Yes, exactly.
They do it.
Exactly. Because it will pay off, because eventually at the end game, you will have access to the Holy Knight class, or you'll have access to the Bow Knight class. Like, those ones that, for me, and a lot of people have said this online, for me, if you're having master classes... you should expect people to go for those. You should expect people to want your characters to be at the utmost they can possibly be, which is the highest rung. And the master classes are just... they feel way more specialist than where you want them to be, right? Because for a sword-based character, there is really no master class that fits them. A purely sword-based character has... no class they can go down, because the only class is the Mortal Savant. And the Mortal Savant is a character that requires not only sword, but reason. And there is no character in my army, save Dorothea, who, to be frank, her physical strength isn't that high, who can really take advantage of that class in its proper way, because you need a character like Robin from Awakening who's really good at magic and at swords. And there just isn't that character, at least in my class of students, that could apply to that kind of specific.
Physical and magic at the same time.
Yeah, aside from Byleth, who Byleth can do that, and actually later on in the game, Byleth becomes far more magically focused. And it's a thing that I invested in, as I realized that was happening.
But Byleth levels up in a very different way to every other student. So
Byleth is a god. Byleth just gets stupid, gets 7+1 stats every level. It's crazy.
Wow.
So it's a separate thing, but. For me, the masterclasses drove me insane because I'm like, none of these work and I have to move them around. By the end of the game, yes, I was there and I had it, but Petra, for example, I took Petra down fucking 17 different routes. First she was going to be a Wyvern, then she was going to be a Pegasus, then she was going to be an Assassin or a Swordmaster. She has the most classes unlocked through my entire army, just because I couldn't fucking decide what to do with her. And at this point, I had done all the skills, I'd leveled her up to be a Wyvern Lord, and I'm on the last map, and all I've been doing is keeping her as a fucking assassin, just because there are chests everywhere, and she's helpful to get chests. So, it was no, not worth it in any way. But I can make her a Wyvern Lord if I want to, and she's really good at swords and axes and bows. She's good at everything, basically.
Did you recruit much from other houses, or are you given extra characters who are non-students anyway, or is this very spoilery territory and we can end this conversation now?
Well, yeah, so there is the opportunity to recruit characters from other houses, and my advice to you would be, if you are going to do that, if you plan to play this game once, look up the paralogs, because the paralogs are specific chapters that are bonus missions that you will only get if you have a character from that other house in your party. That's mainly for the second half of the game. For the first half of the game, I think you can have one of the characters that's involved in the paralog in your party and it will play out. Whereas in the second half of the game, if you don't have both characters, you won't see the paralog. So Mercedes, for example, is the only character I recruited. And in the second half of the game, there is a paralog with her and Casper. And it's actually one of the most important story paralogs in the game. It reveals the identity of a key character, which I don't know that I would have gotten if I hadn't had this paralog. And that was only because I randomly decided I wanted to recruit Mercedes, because I wanted an extra healer. She seemed like she fitted really well into the Gremory class, which is a class which is focused around both faith and reason. And so that's why I recruited her, and I liked her. I thought she was an interesting character. So I got that paralog because of that. But if you don't recruit Mercedes and you just have Casper, you're not going to see that paralog. So you miss out on that entire thing. I am obviously playing through this game multiple times. I'm going to do a Golden Deers run. I'm going to do a Blue Lions run. So for me, I don't really care about recruiting characters. That's why I only recruited one. Because the thing I really liked about this game was doubling down on your own students, was doubling down on that very small, intimate class, and having everyone support with everyone.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying that aspect, and I've not felt much of an urge to recruit others.
Totally.
In that sense.
I would only say recruit others if you're interested in the paralogs, and the paralogs are probably some of the best maps and objectives in the game, as well as they elucidate a lot of story stuff that I wouldn't have known otherwise. But also the advice I will give you in terms of recruiting people is when you go around and talk to them, they're all like, okay, you need to have magic and bow. And I'm like, well, I'm fucking miles away. How am I going to get this person? Or you need to have authority and lance. And I'm like, my Byleth hasn't used a fucking lance at all. He's level E in lance. That doesn't matter. If you get support level B with these characters, they will more than likely just join you. So don't worry about upping your stats, because that's one way of doing it, but it's also a way harder way of doing it, because that means your Byleth, if you want to get everyone, has to be a master in pretty much every fucking stat, and you physically can't do that. So just do support levels, give them gifts, have tea times with them, etc. If you want to get them to your side, just give them the lost items, give them their gifts. All that stuff will then mean that they will eventually join you if you get them to level B support. And it is possible. I saw someone on Twitter being like, I recruited every character. You can do it. It's very doable. It will just take a long time. It will take a lot of work, extra work, and it will mean that, your playthrough will be that much longer for doing so. So yeah, my advice to everyone out there would be focus on support level and take a look at the paralogs. If you're only going to play through this game once, which I assume is most people, then go after the paralogs that you want to do.
And building support with other houses you can do through gifts and cooking.
Yes.
And is that what you'd recommend?
Yeah, through having meals with them. For me, I tended to just have meals with my class because motivation is such an important factor.
Exactly, yeah.
But tea time, doing cooking meals with them, just giving them the lost items. The lost items is a big thing because it will give them +2 to their motivation.
And that's just, you just look up a list online.
Yeah, you just look up a list.
Yeah.
Exactly, because otherwise you're clicking through fucking endless. I mean, you can try and figure them out, but like it's just
I figured one out.
not.
It was fun, but
you can do that. But I now have a list that's ridiculously long, and most of them I can't give anymore because I don't have any of those characters, so it's just kind of pointless. So in terms of other characters, I would say it just depends on what your plan is with this game. For me, when I go into my next playthrough, I'm going to look up the power logs, and I'm going to recruit specific characters that I want to do those power logs, but also I'm going to mainly focus on the characters that I have, and build those supports, because I think that is... When I talk about the difference in Fire Emblem between, say, a game that I really enjoy and a game that is less so, Radiant Dawn I just played through, and I think one of my fundamental problems with Radiant Dawn is that it just jumps you around constantly. It doesn't let you commit to an army, it doesn't let you commit to a group of characters, you have no attachment to anybody, you're just ping-ponging around with all these different places and different people. And I felt zero attachment to anybody in that game. Because I hadn't invested in leveling them or whatever, they all come at different classes and levels, and it's just a mess. Whereas in this game, it is such a tight-knit group. You are with those students the whole way through, and you get to know them so well, and you pick a path, you feel so much more invested because you have trained them to get to that place. And I think that is why this game is connected so much with me, is because it really doubles down on a small group. And even later in the game, the maximum units you can take into a fight is maybe 10 or 11.
Wow.
And that is unheard of for a Fire Emblem game.
It's normally as high as 20?
It can be, yeah. It can be like 15 to 19 to whatever. Like, you can have a lot of characters. But this game recognizes, I think, that you're going to be spending a lot of time with these characters. These are the ones that matter. And yes, you do get other faculty members. You can recruit Manuela and Hanneman if you want. You can get Catherine on your side, or Shamir, or these other, like, teachers and faculty members.
Yeah.
And there are a few that I have used in my army just because I don't have enough characters otherwise. But for the most part, I've stuck with my core group and I've really enjoyed playing with those guys. So yeah.
It's cool. I think what's interesting is that Intelligent Systems could have done a very by the numbers, good looking Fire Emblem game, more or less gone with a similar system to the Fates games, and they decided, no, we're not playing it safe, we're twisting, and they went big and bold, and I can accept that that's maybe not going to appeal to everyone, but like, I'm glad they took that gamble, and like, I am enjoying it so far. It's a slow burn for me personally, but I'm prepared that I will enjoy this much more when I'm 30-40 hours in, and like, I'm just glad that they took a gamble on what was not becoming a stale formula, but like, they had a safe formula in Fates and Awakening and the Echoes remake. I know that was slightly different, but like,
it's a very different game. Yeah,
but like, those were very good selling games, and then they could have just stuck by that formula, and they've not. They've really kind of reinvented the formula substantially, and that's cool to see. Like, that they don't just play it safe.
Yeah, and you look at like Pokemon, for example. You compare what Game Freak is doing with the new Pokemon to what Intelligent Systems done with Fire Emblem, and it's like worlds apart in terms of ambition, in terms of scope, in terms of innovation. Yeah, it's interesting that this is a series that had found a very popular niche, and it could have kept going down that path, right, with children and with waifus and anime and all that stuff, and it has its fair share of...
It does to a degree, yeah, but...
It does, like, I was showing you some videos of, like, Dorothy was flirting with me in the first support conversation, and Manuela is just, like, all fucking over you. It's just ridiculous. But what I'll say is that, by having there not be marriage and children and all of that extra superfluous nonsense, which I did like, I thought was really good in Awakening, but in Fates it felt very tacked on.
Definitely.
By not focusing on that, you can get relationships that are not necessarily leading romantically, but are much more friendship based, and even between male and female characters and stuff like that. And what it means is that your class feels very tight knit. It just all of that just works in symphony with this core idea of you are the professor, this is your class, and even after the 5-year time jump and all that stuff, there's still that core identity of the group that you have. I will say one of my favorite things about the 5-year time jump that I didn't expect is that everyone looks fucking different. They get new outfits, new haircuts. It's great. They show up and I'm like, oh, whoa, Petra, you look so different. You got some fucking cool shit you're wearing right now. It's great. And actually, I haven't been spoiled too much on any of the other armies. I haven't really seen that many of the other characters post-time skip, which is interesting. I wonder how that plays out in the different routes and all that stuff, and all the routes have their own things, etc. So, yeah, I don't know. Any other things you want to say about Fire Emblem? Of course, you've got a long way to go, but...
I need to play more, and then I'll come back with some more thoughts. But
cool.
It's a slow burn for me so far, but I am enjoying it. 10 hours in, and going very slow, bally pace.
Yeah, I would say advice for people out there is to just, not feel overly like you have to optimize all the time, because you will get more time than you need, especially in the later parts of the game. It's not just the school year that will give you the time to do that. You will get time later on to buff your stats and to have more support conversations. I think I had maxed out every support conversation by chapter 14 or so, or maybe 15 or so. And one of the interesting things actually is some of the support conversations you cannot access until after the time jump happens. So there will be some that you'll be locked out of. There's one with the character Cyril that I never got his C rank when I was in the school portion of the game, so now I just can't access it. So I would say try and get everyone to at least a C rank before you go through this time skip, because after the time skip happens, new conversations open up that then reference things that happened in the previous support conversations that were pre-time skip, which I think is really cool. I do like also that some of the conversations have 4 conversations, because they'll have 2 arrows over the top of them, so you have 2 B rank conversations and then an A rank or whatever. Okay, that's a lot of Fire Emblem. I freaking love it. I think it's fantastic, and I just kind of want to finish it now and play more and just never stop playing.
And you're going to go straight into your Golden Deer run after that?
Yes, I that's kind of the plan at the moment. Do a New Game Plus, just go Golden Deer, and I'll be streaming that playthrough, so that will be a lot of fun. Nice. Okay. How do we segue out of this, Bally? Let's segue out of it on some fucking motorcycles shooting down some fucking aliens. Let's talk about Blazing Chrome.
Blazing Chrome. What a name for a game, first of all. It's just
fucking metal-ass name. Contra-ass name, I'll say. Do you want to set up Blazing Chrome, Bally, and how we played this and what happened?
Yeah, so we'd played Contra 3 last year, and it was kind of, you were inspired by Dan and Vinny from Giant Bomb playing, what was the name of their series? This Is the Run. And they had played a number of Contra games, I believe, and the SNES Classic had come out last year, and was it 2017 actually? I think it was. We played Contra last year, but it came out in 2017, as in the SNES Classic. So we were like, when you were in Brussels, you said, Bally, we should be playing Contra 3, and so we played it through. We had to save state abuse quite badly by the end, but
we were time limited, so
we were time limited, and we had a fantastic time with that game.
It's one of my favorite co-op experiences ever. Playing Contra 3.
It really is.
I loved it. There's some bullshit in that game, some fucking bullshit, but we got through that bullshit, we beat the bullshit, and I appreciate that. It is a nonsense type of game, because as we kind of mentioned last episode, when you play a game like that, you need to communicate. And the easiest way of communicating is short phrases that make no sense to anybody who's not playing the game. Yes, Blue Balls is a prime one for playing Blazing Chrome. Anytime some projectile that came out was always blue, and it was usually round. So very good consistency there. So we would always be shouting blue balls at each other to remind, okay, we need to remember the pattern of this boss. So remember the next phase. Green triangles, all that nonsense. Ninjas, we said ninjas a lot when the ninjas were coming. And it's this weird language you develop between yourselves for certain sections that's a shorthand to remind each other and to be like, so that you can play better.
Because your brain is actually engaging on two levels. Because one, you're in there in the now fighting off whatever is coming, and at another level, you are thinking about what's coming next. You're preemptively thinking, right, I know that the blue ball's coming, or whatever, or the ninjas or whatever. So it is helping your partner by saying, I appreciate you're engaging with your brain on one level, but here, let me help you on this other level. And especially for someone like me, where I'm just awful at Let's Playing, for example, and I'm very good at playing there in the now, but I'm bad at like preempting, what's coming. So you saying, blue balls, Bally, blue balls are coming. Like, it really does help. And and I actually think, so Blazing Chrome just kind of came out of nowhere to a degree. I think it's like is it a Brazilian developer or something?
I think so, yeah.
So, and you'd seen it like being reviewed, and you were like, we should try this. And it was on Xbox Game Pass, we should say. So you got it on your laptop while you were in Edinburgh, brought around my Pro controller, we synced it all up to your laptop, and we just had such a great time. And with the biggest difference really between this and Contra 3, I think, is the save system, where this doesn't take you, I think there is a mode where you can go back to the start, but this game doesn't take you back to the very start. Like, it is, there are essentially 3 checkpoints per level, and the levels are very long. They are like,
it's a modern video game. It's forgiving in that sense. But yes, I agree with you. The levels are extremely long, and you don't just go straight into aside from the final boss fight, which is just a gauntlet. You don't just go straight into a boss fight. You have to play through the whole level, make sure that you're really executing on it, so you have enough lives that when you get to the boss, you have that wiggle room to die a couple of times if you need to.
Yeah, and I think like the design of some of these levels and the bosses, and I would say that a lot of there was some bullshit, but a lot of it was cut out compared to a game like Contra, and that's a nice thing of when you make a modern game that's based on a classic game. Like, you can cut out a lot of that stuff, and
100%.
I thought the difficulty was just right. Like, it was really hard. There were moments where we were like, I think you said, Bally, do we have to beat this game? And I was like, we have to beat this game. I didn't know
if we had the time to do it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But
we were looking at YouTube videos, and we had 2 missions left, and I'm like, we're at the start of the snow speeder bike level, where, my God, like, there are blind things that jump at you, and you do have warning for them, but you have to like jump over these gaps. You have to do little hops, and then you have to fight a thing while jumping over things. It's a hell of a level, and we were just dying nonstop. We couldn't figure it out, but we did. Like, we found a thing that worked, and eventually you get through it, and eventually you're like, okay, well, we've done that part, we can do the next part. And it is just that slow building of confidence and ability, and also communication. But I think we were also maybe on a bit of a back foot, because the controller setup was not ideal, right? It was us controlling, like, I downloaded X360 Ace, which is a program that essentially lets you use any controller on PC, because Game Pass doesn't really have native support for a Pro controller. It has like Xbox gamepad support, but it didn't have for that. So we were Bluetoothing to my laptop, which inherently brings in some lag to some degree. The angling, so doing like angling upwards your gun, was really finicky, and I think that's just because the controller calibration wasn't great. And I think if we played it on Switch, I think we'd have had a much easier time, if I'm honest with you, just with the controls. But because of that, I think we are on a little bit more of a back foot. And I actually watched Easy Allies. They did their big beach stream, Easy Living, and they played 40 minutes of it. And I felt so depressed, because like watching them play through, they beat like 3 levels in 40 minutes, and I was like, fuck my life. Like, this took us 6-7 hours to do the whole game, and we went at about a pace of an hour per mission or so.
Definitely the last 3 levels, yeah.
Yeah, so the last 3.
And the final boss, there was one phase in the final boss that we call green triangles.
Yeah.
And I could not for the life of me get out the way.
Well, no, that was the blue, but that was the red one. The green lasers was different to the red pyramid kind of.
It was the red diamonds.
Yeah.
And the red diamonds just killed me every damn time. And like, I genuinely thought, like, we're not going to be able to beat this game because I can't get past this one phase. I get hit on it every single damn time, and I did actually overcome it. And it's that sense of achievement. And I just think that also the design on the levels and the world they're portraying, yes, it is still like an alien invasion like Contra, but I think the sprite design and the design of some of the bosses is done impeccably well. Like, it's a really cool world. Like, and there's bikes and mech suits and
they vary up the
great.
gameplay as well, like from the motorcycle sections. This game is like very shameless in its ripping off. There's even a boss in this game that I'm like, this is literally just from Contra Hardcore. Like, this is just literally copy and fucking pasted from Contra Hardcore.
Yeah.
And this game is like, you've not seen that game, but that's one of the games that Dan and Vinny played through. This game it's ode to Contra, but more, it is specifically an ode to Contra Hardcore in so many aspects, from the look of it to the weapons and things like that. It's very much referencing that game non-stop. But there's also surprises. Like, there was a level where we didn't see coming, and it was a completely different style of gameplay, and we're like, oh shit, this is really cool. We then realized that, oh fuck, we're going to have to beat a boss, and it's going to be really hard in this type of level, but it was awesome that just kind of surprised us out of nowhere, and I was like, whoa, we're now doing something completely different. So even within each mission, I would say it's more than 6 missions, because within each mission, like, that speeder bike level was totally different to the platforming stuff that comes after it, which is totally different to the boss that comes after it. So it's almost 3 levels in one, essentially, like completely different biomes and regions. So they're constantly changing things up, and I think that is part of the hook that keeps you going, is like, it's not just run and gun constantly, it's always giving you something a little bit different. Which I appreciate quite a bit.
As a whole, though, I think I probably had a better time with this than Contra 3 personally. I don't know what you think. I just think the design, the checkpoint, the fact we weren't obviously using save states, like, it felt, fresher, and it would have been nice to have more slick controls, especially for that diagonal, like you mentioned, but
I think for me it was, it's my fault because I've got a laptop and I've got Game Pass, and I didn't want to spend the 15.
But hey, you paid like £1 for the month for this game.
Well,
so
yeah,
it's not like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I paid what I got. It would have been better to play it on my desktop or whatever, and have 2 Xbox controllers. That would have been the ideal setup, but we couldn't do that for obvious reasons. I think that detracted somewhat for me from it, because there were definitely frame rate problems, and to some degree I couldn't tell whether that was my laptop crunching or whether it was deliberate game design, because games of that era did have slowdown. There was certainly one boss, like the fucking poison water snake boss, where it was just a crawl frame rate wise, and it actually helped us quite a bit to defeat it. But I think that somewhat limited my experience, and I also think one of the things that turned me off this game to some degree was the jump, because it doesn't do the traditional Contra like ball roll, like when you jump, you just jump straight up. You don't do like a forward flip when you jump, and there's something about that which they were so clearly adhering to everything Contra. The fact that they didn't do that was a little weird to me, so it felt a little off kilter in that sense. But everything else I think is just exceptionally well done. It is clearly a love letter, and such a well polished, really nicely thought out love letter to that series. And in an era where Konami have announced a Contra game that looks like a garbage fire, that is just this top down mess of pixels and polygons, just that thing they announced at E3, fuck that thing. Like, fuck Konami. This is what you want from a Contra game in 2019. 100%. And they just did a bang-up job with it overall, I think. One of the disappointments, I would say, is the special weapons. I think they all kind of suck, except for the wave beam, which is nice, and grenades. I liked using grenades. Grenades were pretty good.
The laser was okay at points, but it wasn't...
Yeah, but when you compare it to traditional Contra weapons, like the spread shot, or there was one specific gun in Contra 3 I remember being my favorite.
Lack of a spread was weird, yeah.
But yeah, I would say that those kind of were some of the things that were missing for me. But yeah, overall I digged it. I thought it was very good. And definitely you can play through it single player, and I think there are some parts where I'm like, this is much easier. Like, Bally, just die and don't steal my lives, because I can do this if you're not like on the screen at the same time as me. There were definitely moments. I think it's because my character was in the foreground, yours in the background, or mine was in the background, yours in the foreground. It overlapped sometimes, and I didn't know where I was going, and I couldn't see properly, and it was just a bit of a mess. But yeah, it was definitely to me, Contra games are very, very fun. They are very much exercises in cooperation, and they are very much exercises in pattern learning and memorization, but also much more twitch skill than that. Like, there is learning of patterns, but those patterns are not always consistent, and it is about having the twitch skill to deal with it while also having the knowledge. And I like that combination of things, you know, like it goes well together, and is executed really, really nicely. So, yeah.
It was
cool.
It was a blast. Really, really cool.
Great.
Shall we talk about some Smash Brothers? Because Hero fell in from nowhere from Dragon Quest.
Did. Yeah.
And we had a little bit of a match with Hero a few times, and
we did.
He's maybe is it fair to say he's maybe got the craziest move in the whole of Smash Brothers?
Well, he has a move where you can just fucking kill yourself, which I did way too many times to count. I think his moveset is just obscene, but it's also amazing, and it is so Sakurai to be insanely referential, just to like put so much love and care into this franchise, which clearly is like so important in Japan, like is just a huge deal over there, and is slowly getting a bit bigger in the West. And I think Dragon Quest XI on Switch is going to help it to consolidate there. Like, the idea that you can have a move that turns you to metal, but also there's Metal Slash, and if you use Metal Slash on someone who is metal, they will just die instantly. Like, that's the kind of minutia that Sakurai gets into that I just fucking love. But his moveset it's so ripe for nonsense to happen. My favorite fucking moment, which was just magical, was you jumped at me and I pulled off the sleep spell, and you were jumping to like do a forward air or whatever, and the sleep spell hits you in midair, your body flies over me, and you get fallen asleep, and you just tumble off the edge just to sleep, because your forward momentum carried you into the sleep spell and then off the edge. And we were just laughing so much because it was obscene.
It's good revenge for all of those Yoshi egg KOs.
Yes, it is 100% revenge for that. But it's just so random. It just happened. Like, there's so much room for nonsense to happen with the Dragon Quest hero, because his moveset is so diverse. It's crazy. Like, the level of care and polish is unlike any other series. Like, Smash Brothers does this better than literally anything in video games. It's the thing that makes me so sad about the lack of trophies and the loss of so much of the museum and history aspect of Smash Brothers is the characters and the stages get all this adoration, but I wish there was like more stuff to just pour through in terms of having, you know, descriptions of things and not just fucking spirits, which I'm going to constantly complain about, but it's still a thing that brings this game down in my estimation. It just naturally does.
I guess we should make clear for those who don't know, Hero is obviously from Dragon Quest, and he's got like 4 different costumes from 4 different entries in the series. So his moveset is actually fairly standard other than this one move. So he's got his, you know, he's got a sword that slashes. He can use like ranged fire, which kind of feels a little bit like Samus's charge gun.
It's a charge up fire move.
It's a charge up fire move, but it's all about the down special. So the down special brings up a menu of 4 moves that are like next to your damage counter, I guess, and it looks literally...
Yeah, it's like the additions they've done with like Animal Crossing Villages. You can now see what item they've carried, or Joker's persona meter and stuff like that.
So it brings up 4 moves and looks like, you know, turn-based JRPG Dragon Quest on your screen.
He's literally a Dragon Quest select menu.
And then you can pick which move from the 4 moves and then use it. And it uses MP, and you have an MP of bar of 100 that when you use a move, it gets knocked down and then it builds up gradually again. So we estimated there must be about 15 to 25 different moves that will randomly appear whenever you use your down special that appear on that list of 4.
4 of them will appear.
Yeah. So you've got 4 random moves that appear every time, and then the better your knowledge on like those 4 moves and the quicker you're able to like get them out, you can pull off some insane stuff. And like some of them have like crazy area of effect kind of stuff. Others just kind of give Hero a speed boost, or use like a sleep spell, or like a laser, a big laser, a smaller laser. What are some other ones? There's one that like makes him steal and recovers, I think.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Just so many, and I think it's a lot of fun to play around with, but it's also really tricky, especially with the attacks that are close range attacks. So stuff like the one that freezes you, and the one that's like Hatchet Man, which is the big over the head swing. Those ones, you need to be situationally placed to where that will pop up where you're in the right place. It's much easier to stand back and scroll through, and if you have a ranged one, use the ranged one, because that will give you some time to send it out and stuff like that. It's I believe something that people will get used to, but I think the random nature of Hero, the other thing he can do randomly is just critical hit. Just out of nowhere, he'll just do a crit.
On any move, right?
On any, no, mainly on his sword attacks, I think. It's his sword attacks that do crits, and that's just like the bane of Smash Brothers players. Like, this character is RNG god. He is just RNG personified.
I think they designed the character for James Jones from RFN.
Yeah, definitely. Like, he's chaos. He is pure chaos, and I kind of love it. It is like we weren't playing with items, but some of the shit that happened brought me back to days when we would play with fucking items and random nonsense would happen.
Yeah, that's what it felt like.
It's weird. It's just like throwing him in with all the items as well just seems like a recipe for craziness. Because also, I imagine the metal skill, like metal boxes you get as an item in Smash Brothers, if you get one of those and then he uses Metal Slash on you, I imagine that will just kill you, just like if you turn into metal. So, yeah. And another thing that is really interesting about it is that recovering and using your regular moves, so your regular B moves, also consume MP. So, and when you don't do them, I love this. When you aren't able to do them, it does the little sound from Dragon Quest when you've run out of MP. It's like, duh, like it's this tiny little jingle that plays to signal you don't have enough MP to use that move.
And that can happen in midair as you're trying to recover back to the stage, and it's just hilarious.
And it did happen to me. Yes. It happened to me, which is a little ridiculous. And there's also a random move that can just kill you, Thwack, which just has a percent. Just like in the Dragon Quest game, it's a spell that has a chance, like low percent chance to just you die, and so you can just die, which is great. As I said, a Smash Pro nightmare essentially is the hero from Dragon Quest. So I wonder if they'll use him in tournaments or if he'll get banned or what. I'm fascinated.
I'm just fascinated.
As we record this, EVO Grand Finals will happen this evening Pacific time for Smash Brothers. So I'm interested to see how that happens. It's going to be too late for me to watch, but I want to see how that shakes out. It's going to be fun to see. It's going to be
weird. When are we getting Banjo?
They said fall, which is very vague.
Fall.
I don't know what that means. Autumn time. At some point.
What is a fall?
What is a fall? What is fall? What is holiday? What are all these words that the video game industry uses that don't actually mean anything, but kind of mean something? There's too many of them to count. I want to play loads more with him. Actually, I did his classic mode, so I went through and beat that, which is great. Lots of fun little references there. You fight a bunch of blue Kirbys, which are slimes, essentially. It was good. I appreciate that.
One of the animations, what do you call them? The celebrations. What are they called?
Celebration. Victory screens.
It has like Hero jumping around on the slime, which is fun. Yes,
that's a reference to, well, in Dragon Quest 11, actually, you can use that as like a riding thing you can ride on. But also traditionally.
Yeah. And it reminds me, I need to play that game, so thank you.
Yes, and it's coming out soon.
It
is coming out in September, which is good. And from what I've seen, I watched some of the Treehouse footage of it. Looks like a really good version. Like, frame rate seems pretty stable. It is 30, but like it looks really nice. Very solid. Nice. So hopefully that will turn out great. And I think the last thing I want to cover real quick is, I mentioned the Messenger last time, but I didn't really talk about the DLC because I just talked about how annoyed I was. I had to fight the final boss again. I've now beaten Picnic Panic. I've beaten the DLC. It's good. I think it's really hard. I think it definitely has, the challenge written on the front of it, and it's like, hey, this is going to fucking fuck you up, man. It does the thing that I dislike about bosses, which is you have to wait for opportunities to hit them, like in Donkey Kong Country. And that frustrates me to no end. There's like limited times in which you can hit the boss and do damage to it, but you have to dodge through a bunch of bullshit to get there. So the bosses just take fucking ever. Like, it maybe takes 7 or 8 minutes to fully finish a boss, which is a long fucking time for a boss fight. when you think about it, it's just like, God, some of these just take way longer than they should do. But it does do some interesting stuff in the end game. One of the parts is a boss fight that is essentially a speed run. You're speed running against like a shadow version of yourself, and there's like multiple different paths you go through depending on which ones you fail and which ones you succeed in. You have to beat him 5 times, and he has to beat you 5 times. And if either of those happen, either you win or it resets you to the beginning. And it's a real challenge. It really tests your skill of the movement of that game, and some of the advanced skills in it and how they work, which is fun to pull off, but also really challenging. And then the final boss is also just this gimmick thing, which is basically a reference to Punch-Out, which I found a lot trickier because I'm not that great at Punch-Out. But yeah, I think like the DLC is cool. It definitely adds some fun platforming stuff, but a lot of it is pretty gimmicky. Like it starts out with this side-scrolling, you're on a boat and you're fighting against an octopus and you're like smashing through crates, and it's like 3 lanes that you can go in. So there's multiple gimmicks, I would say, in this DLC that are not traditional messenger gameplay. Some of them work and some of them don't work as well. It's worth giving a go if you've beaten the main game. I would say it's a fun time. It made my fingers bleed, but I do relish the challenge in that game. I do think it's challenging, but it's a fun challenge, and it's good to overcome it. So yeah, check out the Messenger DLC. It's free, so you might as well give it a look. And yeah, that is going to close us. Oh boy, lots of stuff to talk about, but I think we have covered pretty much everything we wanted to do. So we will come back after the break, and we'll just quickly wrap up with some emails that you have sent us. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Reach for my hand, I'll soar away into the dawn. No, I wish I could stay here in cherished halls, in peaceful days. I fear the edge of dawn, knowing time betrays. Glass in this beloved place. Silver shines, the world dines, a smile on each face. As joy surrounds, comfort abounds, and I can feel I'm breaking free. For just this moment lost in time, I am finally me. Yet still I hide behind this mask that I have become. From as I live out each peaceful day, deep in my soul, oh, I know I can stay. So I wish I could hide away, hold tight to what I love, keep cruel fate at bay.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second part of today's show. We've got an emails segment coming up, and this happens every now and then, but the inbox is very, very low on your emails. So we are
literally empty. Literally empty.
It's gone.
Literally.
It's empty. So we're putting out the call. Please send in an email to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We also take in comments and questions in our Discord server. There's a link to that in the description, and on our Twitter account @TNL Podcast.
But send us an email. Be old-fashioned. Be a good old-fashioned person. Send us an email.
It's yeah, and it's not on display for everyone else to see like it would be on Discord. But yeah, we appreciate those, so that would be great. Our first email today is from Jackpot, who's from Vancouver, Canada. Hey guys, sorry if it's been asked before, but do either of you have an example of a game series that you didn't have any interest in, but then years later you finally try a game in the series and end up loving it? I ask because recently I had mentioned on the Discord that I was playing Yakuza 0 in preparation for Judgment. I've never played any Yakuza games before, but now I feel an urge to go back and try them, and I would strongly recommend listeners get into Yakuza 2.
Okay. Do you have any, Bally, that kind of stick out to you? Because I know, now you have a PS4, you have a wider variety of options of games that before you were probably just not interested in at all. That
I think
you
there's
have access to.
Before we did this podcast, I had a very select few kind of series that I was interested in, I should say, and they were mainly like Nintendo first party, Mario, Zelda. I was obviously into like Mario parties, the sports games. It was quite a niche in the grand scheme of video games. It was quite a niche select few series I was into, and then I guess since we've been doing the podcast, I've really gotten into stuff like RPGs generally. So Fire Emblem is a series. I've played quite a few Fire Emblems now, and I've really enjoyed those. As you say, I bought a PS4 like just last year. It was only last year. It feels like I've owned it way longer. So stuff like the Uncharted series, like I've played 1 and 2 now.
But I think you had an interest in Uncharted, right? Like this is more talking about games that you didn't have any interest in at all.
I think no interest in at all, and then I tried because it was always esteemed as a very big game in Nintendo history is Metroid Prime and like that series.
Yeah,
and I've definitely said that before in the show that like I've played Metroid Prime 1 and 2. I'm kind of waiting for that trilogy to come out on Switch in some capacity to play through. But...
Well, like generally you had no interest in Metroid as a series,
right?
You never played any of the games,
and you were really into the 2D, and I was like, right, I'm going to try that. I think I played the 2D first, didn't I? And
played Fusion first, yeah.
Played Fusion first. I was like, great, MBZ, you were right. It was a great game. Really enjoyed that. I kind of want to now try the 3D series and like try these Prime games, and I really loved Metroid Prime. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and yeah, so that's definitely a U-turn because Metroid Prime didn't do anything that I would traditionally have even liked in the game, like first person exploration, shooting. These are things that I just really didn't gel with in games previous to that. Like I'd never really tried them, and this was it was really out of my comfort zone. Whereas as you say, something like Uncharted, something like God of War, Spider-Man, like these are all types of games I was very keen on. I knew I would gel with a bit more when I got a PS4. So like Metroid Prime definitely stands apart from that.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of Nintendo series that I had less than zero interest in that I tried. I was like, oh shit, this is great. Pikmin is probably the biggest one, which I just, for years, I was like, I don't care about Pikmin. Like, this doesn't do anything for me. Maybe I didn't really understand what Pikmin was or why it was good, but yeah, Pikmin was very much like, I don't care, what is this, who cares, blah, blah, blah. And then you let me Pikmin 3, and I was like, oh, this game's great. This game is really, really good, actually. And now I am a convert, and I will play Pikmin 4 whenever Miyamoto decides it's done, because apparently it's almost done.
That's the weirdest tale in like...
Yeah.
It's done.
So that's a big one, I would say, for Nintendo stuff. I would say, in terms of other types of games, a big one is Wolfenstein: The New Order, which I'm not a big first-person shooter person generally. I didn't grow up with them. Both of us have not played that many of them, and the multiplayer games I do like are or the shooters I do like are multiplayer, as opposed to single player. And I remember, I think it was Total Biscuit back in the day had done a, WTF is for it. I'd watched some Giant Bomb footage and stuff like that, and I was just never that interested in it. It just looked like a kind of grey-brown shooter where you killed Nazis, and I was like, okay, fine. And it wasn't until Wolfenstein 2 was coming out and people were just very hyped about that game that I was like, oh, well, I should probably play the first game first. And while I think Wolfenstein 2 is by far the superior game and just like better in every single aspect, I still think Wolfenstein: The New Order got me into the series and got me interested in the world and the characters, and made me enjoy that style of game that traditionally I just didn't like that much. So I would say that's a big one in terms of just really not having much interest at all to being fully on board for when Wolfenstein 3 comes out. Youngblood, I'm a little
people
hesitant
are not
on.
liking that much.
No, they are not, and things people are saying about it are turning me off quite heavily. So I might play that eventually when it gets really cheap, but I'm not
probably
going to
not
pick
this
that up.
year, you think?
No, probably not going to pick that up this year. Unlikely, unless it goes like fire sale at Christmas that Steam usually does, and it's down to like 10 quid or something, which I can imagine because it's actually a cheaper game. It's like 25.
Did it come on to Game Pass? Is that a thing?
Yeah, very likely actually. Either Game
That's a
Pass
good way of doing it.
or Twitch Prime or something. It'll probably end up on. I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah. So that's a big one. The other recent example is Forza. You can't find someone who cares less about realistic car video games than me.
You really like that game.
Forza Horizon 4 is great. I think it's biased because Edinburgh's in it,
Edinburgh.
right? Like I could, it's so unique to drive around a city that I've lived in and know so well. It's like, and we just never get that, right? Because our city just never is in any media. And all of a sudden, last couple of years, it's like fucking Infinity War. We're in Forza. We're fucking everything, man. Edinburgh's all over the place. Yeah. It's very exciting when that happens. I think it's just very unique for us. So I think that's great. But also, I think Forza Horizon 4 is a really cool game. It definitely has so many accessibility options for people who suck. So you can always rewind no matter what. Like, no matter what race you're in, no matter what you're doing, you just press a button and it'll just rewind you. And you're like, okay, I'll try and take that corner again. And you can just do this as many times as you want until you nail it, until you figure out what you're doing wrong, if it's that you're not braking enough or if it's you're like sliding too much around the corner. It's really good with accessibility, and it always also shows the racing line. So there's a blue line on the ground which shows like where you should be on the racing line. It's very smart, very simple things like that make it a game that I can get into. And also, it's basically an RPG. It's all about leveling things up constantly. You're leveling up each car, you're adding skills to them. You are like, you can go cross country all you want and you'll get points for doing that. You'll get points for drifting constantly. You'll get points for smashing through things and not stopping. It's and there's lots of little hidden open world things around as well. You can smash different boards which will increase your renown, as it were, like these kind of like points that add to your ability to enter certain races and stuff like that. And a lot of that is just the progression of the kind of single player narrative of, you know, entering all the festival stuff and being able to do the big races at the end. And those big races are always impressive. They always have some kind of giant set piece, whether you're racing a train or like a giant boat thing. It's always a bit of a spectacle, which I think is pretty cool. It definitely has elements where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just going to have to drive to this place and it's going to take a while. I'm just kind of driving. I don't really want to listen to the radio. I'll put a podcast on, you know.
I love that stuff, though. I love to I really want to try that series. I
think you would love Forza Horizon 4. You would adore it, I think. It's just such an immaculately polished game. It's so good looking. The cars look incredible, and it feels so distinct between the seasons as well, like the ice and winter and the mud and stuff.
That Lego DLC looks kind of awesome.
It does, yeah.
It really does.
It does.
It's cool.
The one thing I'll say is that when you finish the game, it just fucking gives you like 19 ads for like, hey, you could buy this pass, and it like plays a trailer, and it's like, and download this now in Forza Horizon 4. It's like, I'm playing the game. You don't have to advertise me to be inside the game. But, you know, it's a bit silly. And I don't like love Forza Horizon 4, but it's a game that previously I had zero interest in, a series I had no interest in playing at all, and now was like, yeah, actually, it's pretty good. So those are the two ones that are mainly I had zero interest, and then I played them and enjoyed them. There are other games where I'm like had slight of an interest, and then it blossomed into something much more. The biggest example is Overwatch. Overwatch is a game that came out, and I watched Giant Bomb stream it, and I was like, I feel motion sick watching this. I don't have any interest in this anymore. And I didn't engage in any of it. Like, I knew a lot about it and stuff, and things were talked about it, and people loved it, and it got Game of the Year, and I was like, why is this game getting Game of the Year? This is weird. Like, what? Overwatch, whatever. And then the year later, it was a free weekend for the anniversary, and I played that game for about 40 minutes, and after 40 minutes, I instantly knew this is one of my favorite games I've ever played in my life. It was just like that, and I was like, holy fucking shit, this game is incredible, and instantly I understood why it was so good. So that was like turning on a dime from having not no interest, because I was interested in Overwatch. Like, it looked appealing, and it looked like the kind of thing I'd be interested in, but it just, I thought I wouldn't be able to play it. And now you're talking to me 300 fucking hours later, and Overwatch is like taken over my life. Game is amazing. Another one is Skyrim, I think. Skyrim's a game that I was like, I'm not into Bethesda's games. They're janky, they're bad, you know, they don't, you know, not appealing to me. But like the world building, you can't argue with. I think Skyrim does some of the best world building in video games. It's just such a coherent place. And actually, the Switch version that I played is far more technically competent than I ever thought it would be. It's very impressive on that scale. I really like it. I think Skyrim's fantastic. And then the last one is not a game I had no interest in, but it's a game that, like, once I heard people talking about it, I was like, I should play that. And it took me 3 years to finish it. And it was Xenoblade Chronicles. Because Xenoblade Chronicles, initially, I had it, and I was playing with Wii Remote and Nunchuck, and I was like, this is bad. And I got to the spider boss, and I was like, I can't beat this thing. It's an RPG. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm bad. And I gave up. And a year later, I got a Pro Controller, and I was like, I'll play some more of that game. Got past the spider boss, got like a little bit further, and I was like, I'll put this down again. And then finally, like, pushed through to the end. And by the time I'd finished it, I was like, this is easily one of the best games I've ever played. It's just, it's phenomenal. I love it. So Xenoblade was very much a slow build, but once I got there, I was like, okay, yes, I love this. So yeah, those are some examples for me. Some that I had no interest in, some that were kind of had some interest, but then blossomed into something much more.
I was going to say, and it's not really a series yet, but Apex Legends this year has just like...
Oh, for you, for sure,
completely changed.
If I hadn't told you to go download Apex Legends, you would have just ignored it completely, I think. You would have just not cared an iota, and now you fucking love that game.
I love that game.
So,
yeah,
that's a huge one for you.
There's constantly just stuff coming out in 2019 that's getting in the way of me playing Apex Legends.
I know.
That's how I visualized it, 2019.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, good question, Jackpot. Our next email is from Flapjackal. So recently I realized that the KF7 in GoldenEye for the N64 was in fact not a pencil that shot bullets, as I had believed for so many years. Have you guys had any misconceptions about items or objects from games that you only learned the truth many years later?
Okay. A lot of mine are name related in terms of pronunciation.
A lot of mine are name related as well, I'll admit.
The biggest one is Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, because we called Chows KOs, and I still call them KOs, and I still think that's really stupid, but I call them KOs, because, like, the Chaos Emerald, they're KOs, I don't know. It's just the hard C. I pronounce it with the hard C, and we both did, and I don't know why, but we just did.
Yeah.
So, that's a dumb one, I think.
One dumb name one in Zelda Wind Waker, when I was playing loads of that game with Ali T when we were younger, and... the fish, like the goldfish that like, so there's multiple goldfish. Like, I mean, like the fishes that take up each square that you have to give them food to get them to paint your map. And every time you'd say it, you'd like get your bait out for him, he'd be like, eh? And then Ali T would be like, ¿Por qué? Like, I don't know, it's just a dumb saying why in Spanish. I don't know why the fish would say that, but it kind of sounds like he is saying that. It's
okay.
Really random, really dumb.
Did you think the fish actually was saying that?
Kind of. Like, there's nothing to counter it at the time, you know, so it's just whatever you can imagine it to be. And then I've got another name one was, I think this was just growing up, being an only child, not having older siblings. And there was definitely a point when we were at school and there were people's older siblings who were like getting big into Grand Theft Auto. And everyone, do you know what I'm about to say?
I know where this is going.
So everyone just say Grand Theft Auto, Grand Theft Auto, Grand Theft Auto. They'd say it so quickly, and then I'd say, "What, Grand Theft Daughter?" And I was like, and they'd always talk about how violent and horrendous it was, and I was like, "Yeah, stealing people's daughters, that sounds, horrendous." And we must have been like 10, 11 at the time, which was, I don't know, GTA 2, 3 at that point. I don't even know.
No, GTA 3. GTA 3 is the one that made it famous because it's the first 3D game.
First 3D one. Fair enough, yeah. So there were definitely people's older siblings who were playing this, and them having their older siblings were aware of it and were playing it with them. And I was just like completely Nintendo gamer, only child, far away from ever playing, Grand Theft Auto at that age. And yeah, I was like, Grand Theft Auto.
I think it's also the British accent, the way you say auto, like daughter. Grand Theft Daughter. I forgot about that. That's fucking hilarious. Daughter. I love that.
Lock up your daughters, because Grand Theft Daughter's it's coming out.
Yep.
That was definitely something I was convinced it was pronounced like that.
Okay.
So anyway, those are my vocal ones.
Okay.
Are you done with your vocal ones?
There's some Pokemon.
Kyogre.
Kyogre, for some reason we used to call Kyogre. And then Mew was another one, which I can't remember it was like Meow or something. I remember not being able to pronounce Mew properly. Moo, maybe? I don't know. We're dumbass kids. Suicune, I can't remember what I said, but I remember saying that wrong. And remember when I got into the Pokemon community, people said it a different way. Also, I didn't know. Suicune? I think I always did say Suicune, actually, and I still stand by Suicune, but people say Suicune, and I'm like, no, you're stupid, shut up. People who say Suicune, loads of people in the Pokemon community said Suicune. And I was like, no, you're stupid, don't say Suicune, that's a stupid way to say that name. Never. Some of these I did contract, others I did not. Kyogre was one where I was like, okay, you guys are right, I'm an idiot. Yeah. Like, Kyogre, what a stupid, dumb kid I am.
I've got a couple of visual ones.
Okay.
One is the one that you've said on the show fairly recently about Pokemon Red and Blue.
Yes.
Do you want to say that one?
I had that one, yeah, which is the person who is blocking the cave in Cerulean City. I thought he was a Buckingham Palace guard because
with a bearskin hat, we should say.
With a bearskin hat. Because the cave entrance, you look at the cave entrance, and it doesn't look like a cave entrance. It looks like he's wearing a hat. It looks like he's just a Buckingham Palace guard standing there with his bearskin hat. And for so long, I was like, oh, guy, at the end of the game, you're going to unlock a way to get to the bearskin or to the Buckingham Palace guard guy. And then he walks away from the door, and you realize, oh, fuck, it's a door. It's not a hat.
But imagine like a character in Red and Blue who's like garment in some way would take up a whole extra square on that grid, like that would have just been insane.
I know, it's so illogical, but like it made so much sense to me. It's one of those visual misunderstandings that I was just like, that's very clear to me.
And I know you've also got one in about Super Mario Land 2 that you've mentioned recently.
Yeah, no, there are the horror levels in Mario Land 2. I can't remember what zone it is, but it's one of the zones where it's kind of horror themed, and there are these enemies which are basically Jason masks with knives stuck in their head that wobble around and walk and follow you. When I was younger, I thought those were just fucking strawberries. I thought they were just walking strawberries, and I was like, what the hell? When I found that out later on in life, I was like, my mind was fucking blown, because forever I just believed that I was jumping on these little strawberries, because the knife looked like the little kind of top of a strawberry. Like a little stem sticking out from the top, and because it had little dots on it, I didn't realise those were like a hockey mask dots. Obviously, in the UK, we're not exposed to, like when I was younger, American sports. I hadn't seen a hockey mask before, so my closest analogue was it's this walking strawberry, so I just thought that's what they were. It was very weird.
I've got two from Super Mario Land 2, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
One is that, when you get the fireballs, so the upgrade for that is a feather.
Yeah.
So when you get it, you actually have a feather in your cap.
Right.
But I just thought it was like a loose bit of material from Mario's hat, because he was now Fire Mario, and it was like singed, and it was like,
oh really,
like a little bit of singed hat, just like that, And that's the thing about this game, is that they specifically went for the feather in the cap and then the turnip with the wings, because it was in black and white. They wanted a visual representation of so it wasn't in color where you could tell it's Fire Mario, etc.
Exactly.
So I thought he had like a funny singed hat because he was now Fire Mario. Weird one. Anyway,
there's logic that follows there,
I also borrowed the game from our friend Charlie well before I owned the game, and he was like, I borrowed his game, and when you're going into the game file, you can like jump up to the side, become a bomb, and then go down the pipe. And I jumped to the side, it turns Mario into a bomb, and I thought, oh, this is cool. You can play the game as a bomb and go down the pipe. And actually, that's just a quirky thing they put in the game to delete save files. So I cleared out all of Charlie's save files for that game by accident. And then gave him back the game, and he was like, where's my save file? And I was like, oh, that was an accident. I thought you could play as a bomb. Sorry.
Wow.
There you go.
God, that's hilarious. Oh,
weird.
No.
And I'm sure there's some more.
It's almost as bad as my sister deleting Ali T's save file in Pokemon Blue. Oh my goodness.
Oh God. Who deleted Ali T's save file?
My sister.
Oh, your sister. God.
Yeah. That's a story for another time. Yes. So cool. I don't think I have any others in my brain. It's very hard to think of these.
I mean, yeah, it's very hard to pin down. I think I've got loads.
Unless they're like forefront of mind. I
Right.
probably are a ton, but it's just, those are the ones that came straight to me when I thought about this. Yeah, a lot of them are based around names because we are stupid and can't pronounce anything. I think that's most people, though, when you play video games. I'm reading The Wheel of Time at the moment. I just started the second book in the series, and there's a character there. Her name is spelt Egwene, and in my head, I'm just pronouncing it as Edwin the whole time, Edwin. And
what
apparently,
is it meant to be? Egwene?
It's Egwene.
Egwene.
But I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep pronouncing it as Edwin in my head because I've read 800 pages of that, and I'm not going to stop now. So you can tell me I'm stupid, but she's Edwin now, so you can do what you like until that adaptation of The Wheel of Time comes out on Amazon or whatever it's been picked up by. Then it'll force me to change.
But, I mean, in a world before podcasts, how were we meant to know what anything actually was pronounced?
Yeah, right.
As,
yeah. I mean, for God's sake, when my mum was reading me Harry Potter for the first time, she called Hermione Hermione. So until the movies happened...
I remember J.K. Rowling talking a lot about that during, books 1, 2, and 3,
really?
in public. She'd be like, yeah, a lot of people thought it was Hermione or Hermione.
Yeah, yeah. So for the first 2 books that my mum read to me, I thought her name was Hermione, and it wasn't until the films. And I was like, oh, that's a name? Hermione? I've never heard of that name. Literally had never heard the name before. So, anyway. Basically, the long and short of it is that we're idiots.
We're idiots.
Hey, thanks for sending those emails in. You can send more, as we said. Please do send them in to our email address, which Bally is going to tell you now.
ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We are really, 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 really needing a few more emails.
Please do send them in. We'd love them. It's very funny. My phone went off during the segment. Someone sent an email during our recording of this segment. So we're putting those good vibes out into the ether without anyone having heard this yet. We've got an email already. So hey, our magic is working. So I'm pushing the magic out towards all of you people. Please send more in. Cool. Well, the end of the show is nigh, which means we've got to talk about the next Backlog Club, which is coming soon. We haven't decided a date that we're going to do it on, but it probably won't be too soon in the future, or too far away in the future, I should say, because it should be a pretty short one. We had the votes tallied between F-Zero X, Wave Race 64, and Excitebike 64. And Bally, would you like to reveal the winner?
The winner was Wave Race 64.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as you said, probably a fairly short game.
Talking about games that I have no interest in, let's see how this one lands.
I just hope you can get around the track at MBZ and not go backwards. Probably a short game. It's probably going to be a couple of shows, and then we'll talk about it. But we'll lay that all out in future shows. But get on playing with that. It's available on the Wii Virtual Console.
Yes.
Or if you want to dust off your old N64 and your own Wave Race by some sheer luck, definitely give it a go.
And talking about emails, we do want people to send in their thoughts about Wave Race 64, either from when you played it when you were younger, or if you are playing along with us now. Be good to get some of those comments for the show so we can talk about them when we talk about it. So alongside sending in your questions, do please send in thoughts on Wave Race 64 for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can put, there's going to be a thread in our Discord server to also talk about all Backlog Club related things. So make sure to check that out.
Very good. Cool. Well, we obviously have episode 150 next time, so that's exciting, and I don't know if people want to send in emails about that or whatever. We'll be doing the countdown, figuring out our top 50. Bally just related to me the insane rules he has and how it's going to work, and I'm just going to let him do his thing.
Don't break the system.
He has a system. I'm going to let him do his thing. I'll just be along for the ride and just argue with him about how Advance Wars is not as good as he says it is, etc. So look forward to that next time, and obviously we're going to have a Patreon episode in between then, which is going to be TNL Ranks this time, is it?
It is indeed TNL Ranks, coming out next Monday.
So we're going to figure out what that is, and that will be posted next week. And obviously we have our patrons to thank for supporting us to make those shows possible.
Yes, thank you to our two $10 tier patrons. They are my fiancée Caroline and Atari Alex. Thank you for your support, and thank you to all our other 18 patrons out there. Thank you so much for your support. It's hugely appreciated. Keeps the show on the road.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we will keep on putting out those Patreon shows, one a month, rotating between ranks and takes. Put out TNL takes on Disney a while back. Worth checking that one out if you haven't yet.
Yeah, fun times.
And yeah, we'll get to that.
Cool. So you can find us obviously in various places around the internet. You can find us on Twitter. We are at TNL Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at LordNBZ, where I complain about minutiae in Fire Emblem and menus and things like that. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN 91.
Fantastic. And of course the show is in various places across the vast expanse that is the internet. We exist on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, we're on iTunes, most importantly, where you can review us and rate us. Please do that. We haven't had that many reviews in 2019. It would be nice to pick up the pace there, get some of those going, and get our rankings up a little bit so people can find the show and hopefully enjoy along with all you people, fine folk at home listening. So yeah, check us out there. We're also on every podcasting app available. We're also on TuneIn, so you can talk to your Amazon Echo and say, hey, thingy, I'm not going to say her name because it's going to activate people's
That's
echoes.
the fun of it. You got to say it.
No, I refuse, Bally. I refuse to stoop down to the level of other podcasters. And you can say, play This Nintendo Life, and it will play it from TuneIn. You have to say from TuneIn, I think. But you can find us on TuneIn as well. So there you go. We're on so many platforms now, just all over the shop. And of course, we're on YouTube and stuff like that. So you can find the show there with timestamps, which is very, very handy dandy. Cool. Well, that is going to close us out for this week's episode. We have just entered the eye of the storm now. I think, Fire Emblem's come out, Astral Chain is up next, and then it's just like Link's Awakening, Luigi's Mansion, Pokemon. It's just non-stop ballad to the end of this year. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. It's a good time to be a Nintendo fan. I'm excited. So thanks everyone for listening. We will see you again in a couple of weeks. Until then, thank you very much. Bye-bye. The musical interlude used on today's show was The Edge of Dawn from Fire Emblem Three Houses. Copyright Nintendo 2019.